Last Friday, the artificial intelligence pollster Polly predicted the election result would be a Liberal government. Erin Kelly is CEO of Advanced Symbolics Inc. She's been giving us Polly's findings throughout the race, and she joins us now from the nation's capital for a parting word on what happened last night. Now, before we get started here, let's just remind people of the national seat projection. And we'll just remind everybody that Pauly said there was a 54% chance of a Liberal minority government, which is in fact what happened. But here's how Pauly saw it unfurling. Liberals with a minority, just shy of a majority, though, at 168 seats. The Conservatives at 98 seats. The Bloc Québécois at 32. The NDP, or a little sweeter on them, at 38 seats. 2 Greens and nothing else. That's what was forecast. Here's what actually transpired. Liberals, 158, not so high. Conservatives, 119, much higher. The Bloc at 34, the NDP at 25, lower than Pauly said. The Greens at 2, and nobody else. So, okay, Erin, in your judgment, how did Pauly do this time?
She forecast a Liberal minority government, and that's what we got. She was too hot on the Liberals and too hard, I think, on the Conservatives. So, I mean, we're still waiting for 1 million ballots to be counted today, but I don't think we're going to get to 168. So we have to do some investigation over the next few days to see, did she overestimate the anger that people were expressing over the weekend with Alberta and punish the Conservatives too much for that and reward the Liberals too much. So she was off by about 10 seats. And we're going to be looking and, again, retraining her, fine-tuning her so that, I mean, she's learning like everybody, so that for the next one, she can be closer to bang on. But she was definitely within her margin of error. So we're happy about that.
Yeah, you're quite right, in as much as there may be judicial recounts, there may be challenges and so on, and not to mention the mail-in ballots still to be counted. So we don't have a final seat count yet. You know, it's tempting to say nothing happened last night, right? Because the numbers from last time and this time are so close together. Is that a proper inference to draw?
Yeah, I would say so. It's funny, this morning, my 15-year-old came into the kitchen. I was watching Justin Trudeau's speech because I admit I didn't stay up late last night to watch it. And he just came in, looked at the monitor and said, I don't know why he's celebrating. He accomplished nothing. And it made me laugh because this is a 15-year-old teenager who could see that's exactly what happened. And at the end of the day, this was an election that was more about, it ended up being about trust in government and the competence of the government rather than any vision for the future of Canada, as the Prime Minister or as Justin Trudeau had said it would be about in the beginning.
Now, the Liberals are arguing today that the election did not accomplish nothing. They are arguing today that they have bought more time for their program, and that if this parliament lasts more than the average minority parliament, Justin Trudeau will have been in office potentially for as long as a decade, and he will be able to cement in place the gains that he has run on over the past decade. Now, is there some legitimacy to that in your view?
No, it's certainly not from what we see of people's conversations on social media. I think if Justin Trudeau is going to have a strong vision for the country, now is the time for him to do that, because what we were seeing in this election is he is an unpopular leader, and he won here really because of fears about COVID and what happened in Alberta, and not because of any big endorsement for him or the party or a vision that they communicated through this campaign.
Having said that, does Pauly pick up any goodwill for the Prime Minister still out there?
So we've been looking at actually the Prime Minister and his accomplishments and that of his government, and we've been looking at them in a trust indicator, so fairness, responsiveness, etc. And what we find is that people rate the government well on integrity, so the scandals don't seem to have hurt him that much, but he gets really low ratings on things like openness, on and responsiveness, especially. He and his MPs are seen to be, among the population, people that don't respond when people reach out to them. And the public service is seen to be unresponsive. We saw that in Afghanistan, but that with the Afghanistan issue, where we were hearing that translators were having trouble getting passage to Canada, and that created a whole bunch of dialogue of people saying, yeah, you know what, this government is not responsive. They are not efficient. When I have had issues and I have approached the public service, I have not gotten a response. So, and Justin Trudeau has been prime minister for 6 years, so the blame for that is squarely being placed on him. So there's definitely a lot of work to build up trust and build up responsiveness with the population, and he is running out of time to do that. So he needs to do that in this mandate.
Now, sometimes in elections, of course, it very much depends how the votes break, and that obviously determines the seat count. But the total votes, I mean, it's astonishing how close the seat count is this time versus last time, and how close the total vote is the same this time as last time. I mean, again, Conservatives winning the most votes, Liberals barely, like 31, 32%. Were there any moments that Pauly picked up in the campaign where there actually were significant shifts in public opinion from one party to another? Because it sure doesn't look like anything changed over the 2 years.
Absolutely. It's quite funny. When we looked at what were the key moments in the campaign, we found that for the Liberals, actually, the biggest negativity was just before they called the election. So people knew that they were going to call this election, and they were already talking on social media about how we don't need this election. We don't want him to call this election. So it's quite funny if the prime minister had been, again, responsive and paying attention to what people in Canada are saying, he would have known not to call this election. Then after the election was called, Afghanistan took headlines right off the bat. And again, that unresponsiveness, that disorganization really hurt the Liberals. And then as things progressed, why did you call this election? We're in the middle. And as the fourth wave started to pick up, that really started to hurt both sides. And then the biggest negativity came in for the Conservatives, of course, when Jason Kenney came back from his vacation and admitted that he'd made a lot of mistakes and that Alberta was in crisis. And then it became a referendum on two ways of dealing with the pandemic. One was the big government taking control, getting everybody vaccinated. The other was more laissez-faire, encouraging people to get vaccinated but not requiring it. And of course, the judgment came down on, we need a government that's going to have a plan for this.
Well, let me follow up with you on the Conservatives, because this is now 2 elections in a row where the Conservatives win the most votes, but not the most seats, because they just waste so many votes in Western Canada, winning seats by 20, 30, 40,000 votes. I'm sure they'd like to sprinkle those votes a little more evenly over the rest of the country. Having said that, what does Pauly say about why the Conservatives came up short once again?
So the population liked Erin O'Toole as an individual, and they he really, this election, it did accomplish something in that it gave Erin O'Toole some good profile. But there really is a belief that his party is not behind him. People still don't trust this party. It's seen as a party that is pro-life and pro-guns and all of those things that came out in this campaign. So he's got a real task now to either get his party on board with his progressive agenda or communicate the more conservative agenda to central Canada and see if he can pick up any support that way. I think the progressive angle is going to work better, but then he's going to have the Anime Paul issue where the party is speaking behind his back. So his biggest problem is the party that he represents.
Let me ask you about the NDP. This is now 2 elections in a row for Jagmeet Singh, where we're told he's just wildly popular with much of the electorate, that he is even more wildly popular with young people who are going to come out in droves and support him. And then once again, we see vote count pretty much the same, seat count pretty much the same, status quo. Where did the NDP fall flat, according to Pauly?
So what we saw with the NDP, we have a graph in our system that looks at what we call issue boost. So what issues boost the Liberals, what issues boost the Conservatives? When it came to the NDP, the only thing really boosting the NDP are 2 things: Jagmeet Singh as an individual and pharmacare. The rest of his platform really just looks like the Liberals. And people think, well, if I want daycare, I can vote NDP or I can vote Liberal, but I'll just vote Liberal because they're more likely to win. And I like that platform better than the Conservative one. So the problem with the NDP is they're not differentiating from the Liberals, and they're also seen as being fun. And Jagmeet Singh has the cult of personality, but he's not good at talking about issues that get people motivated. And as much as he energizes young people and some people, because he's not talking about issues that really get them riled up, they're less likely to necessarily show up to vote for him, or at the end of the day, spend that vote on somebody who they think might not win. And they're really looking for those. We see over and over again, people are looking for people who have substantive issues to bring forward, and he's not winning that vote.
Erin, I'll share a little pet peeve of mine, and that is that I really don't like it when journalists tend to say, oh, this was an election about nothing. It was a Seinfeld election. And that feels a bit lazy to me, because the fact of the matter is there were lots of issues discussed during the course of the campaign, and some of them move votes. And I wonder if you could tell us what Polly saw as being perhaps the top 3 issues that engaged people and actually moved votes.
Yes. So it was an issue about things, as I mentioned, and number one, trust in government and responsiveness of government. The issues, it's interesting when you look at the issues that were important long-term in this election, it was things like cost of living was top, the economy, daycare was part of that. It was very important to certain demographics, but there were other issues that did not get the attention that people wanted to see. Immigration was something that we saw a lot of people talking about online, never really made it into the debate or the platform. Also, systemic racism, really, really important for younger demographics, but also different parts of the population for different reasons, which, is probably subject for a whole other show. But then as we got closer to the election, it really became about the central issue: who has a plan to get us through the pandemic and to get our economy launched properly. Now, the Conservatives did well on the economic issues and inflation, but as we got closer to election day, of course, with things that happened in Alberta, we first need to get COVID done, and the Liberal plan to have mandatory vaccines and vaccine passports and getting people inoculated was what won the day.
So can we conclude that we actually did have a useful national conversation about the advisability of vaccine passports, about whether we should be inoculated with the vaccine, et cetera, et cetera? Was that useful?
Yes, I think we did. I think we're settled on, people are basically saying, we want the government to take control of this situation and get us through this pandemic. And then for the rest of the issues, I think it's really important that we not lose sight, though, of those other issues that people are very concerned about. And as soon as we've got a path forward with the pandemic, I think it's really important that the Liberals, I was kind of disappointed in Justin Trudeau's speech where he said, this is not a country divided. I don't see this as a country divided. It is a country divided, and he knows that. I mean, they were throwing gravel at him during the campaign. It is a country divided, and it's important for the leadership to understand that and to address the issues that are dividing us so that we can get back to productivity and trust in government, so that when you bring in these policies, you don't have protests at hospitals, et cetera. People trust you to do the right thing. And there is a lot of work to do to build that. And that's a lot of what this election was about. And it's important that we understand the lessons from this election and fix them.
Well, let's finish up on that in our last minute here, because I think another survey said 8 out of 10 People's Party supporters agreed with the statement that, quote, we are on the verge of a revolution in our society to take our freedom back from governments who are limiting it. I don't want to pull that Hillary Clinton line out about a basket of deplorables, but certainly there. Susan Delacourt in the Star called a certain faction of the PPC support a democratic mutation. What did this election campaign do about all of that?
Well, it definitely, it's not as bad as people think. I mean, when we look at it, there is still trust in the integrity of government and the fairness of government, our judiciary. So people do have faith in that. We're not at the stage of anarchy, but we definitely did see much more anger and cynicism toward our politicians and our government in this last election, which is symptomatic of things that have been happening for the last 2 years being expressed. So we have seen that. And it's important to address it, acknowledge it, and do something about it in the next 6 months of this prime minister's new mandate in order to put things back on track. Right now, we're seeing it's, 5 to 10% of the population that's in that sort of PPC purple army, but that could grow if we don't acknowledge it and find ways to fix it. And the best way to start is to start talking about those difficult issues that Canadians want us to talk about on both the left and the right. Things like systemic racism, immigration, integrating new Canadians, Indigenous reconciliation, climate change, and really listening to people who have different points of views on this and finding how we can bring people together so that we can solve these big issues.
I'd like to think we do that every night on this program, and we're always grateful when you come on with us and help us do that. So thanks again, Erin, and until the next election when we see you again.
Great. Thanks, Steve.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.